Este homem, Robert Fortune, é um dos que no século XIX contribuiu para fazer da Grã-Bretanha dos países mais poderosos do mundo. Diz-se que este homem discreto, ao serviço da Honorável Companhia das Índias Orientais, terá mudado o mundo ao roubar um dos segredos mais preciosos da China Imperial. Muito foi dito acerca de Robert Fortune, sobre a sua coragem e os perigos que enfrentou, sobre o crime que cometera, considerado por muitos como o primeiro roubo industrial da história. Sobre as trocas que testemunhou, levadas a cabo pelo Império Britânico para assegurar o seu monopólio. Robert Fortune esteve no centro de uma aventura que mudou o mundo. Esta é a sua história. Esta é a sua lenda.
Robert Fortune was a botanist and a plant hunter. He was the son of a farmer. He was from a class that typically wasn't given an education, but he was originally Scottish, and there was mandatory schooling in Scotland, so everybody got an education. He had a kind of natural language affinity for plants and became a naturalist, which at the time was a very prestigious job.
I think the moves that Robert Fortune made from place to place in his early days showed ambition, and that he was taken on by the Botanic Garden showed considerable, not just zeal, but knowledge.
He had a drive to achieve. I don't think you could have risen as far or as fast as he did in a society as regimented and rigid as 19th century Britain without having a great deal of determination.
Neste relato da minha viagem, o meu objetivo é espreitar o Império Celestial. Terei o prazer de levar os meus leitores aos Himalaias e de lhes mostrar as plantações de chá do governo, das quais muito se espera e que serão uma grande vantagem não somente para a Índia, mas também para a Inglaterra e para as suas colónias.
So the East India Company came to Robert Fortune. He had one quality that no one else in Britain had, and that is he had been plant hunting in China before. He was the world's leading expert on the plants of China. Fortune was given a list of items that the East India Company wanted. But the most important item on the shopping list were the finest green and the finest black tea seeds. So his job was to go to the best green tea areas and the best black tea areas, collect seeds, collect clones, and bring them back to India. The idea being that India would be a tea garden for the company and would save them from their own financial woes. Tea was incredibly valuable because of the markup. They'd say it was picked for a penny and sold for a pound.
The trade with China for tea was a fundamental source of government income for the British government, both in the later 18th century and in the early 19th century.
If next season nobody brings any tea from China, Britain will worry that they would have a rebellion. So tea was becoming something that of great financial and social, political importance to the British government.
Tea was such a fashionable drink in Britain, and tea couldn't be grown in Britain. So where was it grown? It was grown in a foreign country. What could we do about getting it grown under our own control?
The East India Company was the greatest corporation in world history. It was founded in 1600 was chartered from the Crown. Queen Elizabeth gave the company exclusive monopoly of all trade with Asia. It was owned by its shareholders, but grew to conquer India and dominate trade in Asia. In India, by the beginning of the 19th century, it was a very huge enterprise. It would have over 150,000 people in its private army. So really, at the pinnacle of the tea trade was in the 1820s, when the company exported 40 million pounds in weight of tea from China to Britain. The East India Company did offer opportunities from people from, let's say, not so prosperous backgrounds to actually succeed, to engage in adventure, but also to make their own fortunes.
A 20 de junho de 1848, saí de Southampton no barco a vapor Ripon, da Companhia Peninsular e Oriental, comandado pelo capitão Moresby. Tendo provado que se podia cultivar chá nos Himalaias e que as colheitas seriam valiosas e bem remuneradas, o próximo objetivo seria cultivar um chá de qualidade superior, através das melhores variedades e da melhoria do cultivo. Sabia-se que existia uma grande variedade de plantas do chá no sudeste da China, através das quais se produzia chás de qualidade inferior. Esse chá tinha maior procura do que as melhores variedades do norte, a partir das quais se produziam os melhores chás. Cheguei a Hong Kong a 14 de agosto. Sem nada que me prendesse por lá, aproveitei a primeira oportunidade para ir para o norte, em direção a Xangai.
Shanghai actually was a little marshy village, so it wasn't anything important at all in Chinese history. China basically gave the British a settlement, a huge chunk of land, and say, you go and live there and do business there. You really have to say it was the Western merchants who turned Shanghai into what it is today.
Tendo decidido, se possível, procurar plantas e sementes deste famoso país, havia apenas duas formas de agir. Ou contratava chineses que fossem apanhá-las nas zonas rurais, ou então teria de ir eu mesmo. À primeira vista, a última opção parecia a única possível. Supondo que eu contratava chineses para esse objetivo e muitos teriam aceitado essa missão, como é que eu teria a certeza de que as plantas ou as sementes que me trouxessem eram dos distritos em causa? Como tal, tomei a decisão de ir eu mesmo até Huichao. Não se pode acreditar na palavra dos chineses. Posso parecer insensível, mas essa é a realidade.
To travel in China was extremely risky. Fortune had to hire servants, and among the qualities he was looking for were language skills. At the time, there was no single Putonghua. There was no mother tongue in China that everybody spoke. There were regional dialects that were almost incomprehensible to everybody else. So to go to the green tea areas, he needed guides who could get him there in their mother tongue. China's a very large place, and it's a very diverse place. And one way that the emperor had of making sure everybody considered themselves Chinese was to make them all dress the same way. This was the tonsure.
Men have to shave their forehead, and they wear a long queue. See, that's not Chinese, that's Manchu, but as a symbol of submission, you have to wear that. If you don't wear that, it's death penalty.
So what Fortune did was he took on this haircut. It was the physical sign that he was a subject of the emperor.
Os meus criados arranjaram umas vestes chinesas e o meu rabo de cavalo, que já tinha usado há anos, foi penteado pelo barbeiro.
Now, he doesn't look Chinese. Yet, all it took was saying, I'm from a faraway place, beyond the Great Wall. Beyond the Great Wall was synonymous with being from the farthest imaginable place on Earth. If he was from beyond the Great Wall, he was just a Chinese person from very far away. China at the time had a network of waterways, rather like highways, that just connected most of the inland areas to the coast. It was very easy to get around by boat. These canals, some of them were natural, some of them were dug by coolie labor hundreds of years before in massive state projects.
O barco era robusto, tinha calado plano e era muito esguio na proa e na popa. A corrente e o vento estavam de feição e subimos o rio rapidamente. Estava um lindo dia de outono e a paisagem era encantadora. Viam-se templos budistas e pagodes, por aqui e por ali, sob a copa das árvores. A vista era magnífica e fazia-me lembrar as fronteiras da Inglaterra e da Escócia.
There were moments of joy for Fortune traveling in China, moments where he saw things that he thought were stunningly beautiful or exceptional, and like any traveler. But I think overall, he was fatigued and frustrated much of the time. He was alone. He had no one to talk to. It doesn't sound like he was happy on a day-to-day basis.
De vez em quando passávamos por rápidos que nos demoravam várias horas a atravessar, mesmo com a ajuda de 15 homens, com compridas cordas atadas ao mastro do barco que puxavam por ele ao longo da costa. Nada ilustra melhor a infatigável perseverança dos chineses. Olhando para um rio como este, parece quase impossível de atravessar, mas até esta dificuldade é ultrapassada pelo trabalho duro e pela perseverança. O lento progresso a que éramos forçados era ideal para os meus objetivos e permitia-me explorar as riquezas botânicas do país com facilidade e à vontade.
And for Fortune, time in the wilderness, time alone to look at plants and study them and explore nature was, I think, his passion. His real life's work was to be out among plants. And so these were moments of exquisite joy for him. He discovered a number of new plants that are very common in our gardens today. Every kumquat you see is a plant that Robert Fortune discovered. It's the Citrus fortunei.
Plant hunters were considered adventurers, but knowledgeable ones, people going out to risk their lives to find exciting new plants for people back home. They had the skill of spotting something different. Over 200 common garden plants in the United Kingdom were introduced by Robert Fortune, like jasmine, like honeysuckle, like the rhododendrons and the azaleas.
I think the danger for foreigners in China at that time is becoming more intense.
The rules were that Westerners couldn't go anywhere beyond the treaty ports without being at risk of their lives.
Na noite de 22 de outubro, cheguei aos subúrbios de Hongshaofu, uma das cidades mais recentes e em ascensão do mais rico distrito do Império Chinês. As autoridades chinesas não gostavam que os estrangeiros se aproximassem desta cidade. O rio Xiantangqiang, que nasce nas montanhas prósperas em chá verde de Huichao e cujo afluente seguia para norte das montanhas Bohea, ficava no lado oposto da cidade, a 8 ou 10 quilómetros. Foi-me providenciado uma liteira para continuar a viagem. Antes de partir de Xangai, quando consultei o mapa e planeei o percurso, perguntei se era possível chegar à foz do rio Hangzhou sem atravessar a cidade. Ambos os meus homens informaram-me de que era bastante fácil. Depois de viajar desta forma durante cerca de 1,5 km e à espera de a qualquer momento sair da floresta, fiquei muito surpreendido quando me apercebi de que estávamos cada vez mais perto da cidade. Pela primeira vez comecei a suspeitar que os meus criados me estavam a enganar e que afinal ia passar mesmo pela cidade de Hangzhou. Estas suspeitas foram rapidamente confirmadas pelo aparecimento das paredes e muralhas da cidade. Já era demasiado tarde para recusar este caminho.
Hangzhou was the capital of the Song Dynasty, one of the greatest dynasties of Chinese civilization. It was much more Chinese, much more cultural, had more intellectuals. So in other words, in Hangzhou, you are easily recognized. Foreigners were not supposed to go there.
Ter calma e nunca perder a cabeça deveria ser o lema de quem tenta viajar pela China. Era nestes princípios que eu me baseava, mas neste momento não consegui segui-los totalmente.
He was very nervous. He was highly aware of his vulnerable situation.
You're really not supposed to go to Hangzhou. So you must have some sort of excuse and have Chinese people like a comprador who can explain to local people, oh, don't worry, we're coming from Shanghai, we have a letter from the magistrate of Shanghai, whatever. You could lie about anything because they wouldn't know.
Robert Fortune was very lucky. Violence in China at that time was very random. It could happen at any time. So Fortune was actually quite lucky that he managed during those years to get through pretty much unscathed. He could have lost his life.
Os meus parceiros de viagem, que eram mercadores e criados, eram calmos e inofensivos. Na verdade, faziam um pouco mais além de descansar na cama e dormir, excepto quando estavam a comer ou a fumar. Um deles era fumador de ópio e a droga tinha-o deixado num estado de escravidão.
So, opium is a tremendous problem in China. They're a nation of addicts, every bit as much as England is a nation of tea addicts. China was a nation of opium addicts, and it was a much more destructive plant.
Our best estimates are that about 12 million people were opium smokers in China in the late 1830s.
The British began to encourage the cultivation of opium in India with a specific purpose of enabling their trade with China.
Britain keep going to China to buy tea, and they keep paying with silver. So they ran out of silver in the end by the 1820s. So they wanted to find out something the Chinese would buy with silver so they can get some of the silver back. What Britain's opium trade did is it enabled a small spark to grow into a big fire.
The East India Company controlled the production of opium in its lands in India. It sold these at its auctions in Calcutta and ensured that this opium was then used to gain access to China. This was very clear, very conscious law-breaking of the highest order. The East India Company was clearly the biggest drug dealer in world history.
the emperor sent a commissioner, Commissioner Ling, to Canton to tell the foreigners, please don't bring opium to China. And Commissioner Ling also wrote a letter to Queen Victoria about, you prohibit opium in your own country. Why are you sending so much opium to us? Can you stop it? And of course, the merchants can never stop it because it's all this money. So Commissioner Ling forcefully took their opium stock out of them and burned them.
The first Opium War really broke out in 1839. It was a response by the British state, who sent in British forces to, in a sense, protect free trade.
So you could say that in the end, the Opium War began because of tea. It's a dispute about tea. And of course, China lost the war. Maybe it's the humiliation Chinese people suffered from foreigners, from the British. I think they developed a hatred for foreigners.
O rio Tsiantankiang, às vezes chamado Rio Verde, no qual me encontrava, tem a sua nascente nas montanhas a oriente. O chá verde e o chá preto acompanham este rio a caminho de Xangai. Era extremamente importante procurar plantas e sementes desses distritos chineses, onde os melhores chás eram produzidos, e estou prestes a cumprir esse objetivo. Os viajantes divertem-se a gritar e a fazer sons estranhos. Esses sons faziam eco e eram continuamente repetidos. Os chineses têm preconceitos e opiniões estranhas em relação a este sítio. Disseram-me que os espíritos dos mortos muitas vezes escolhiam ficar neste cenário selvagem e bonito. E disseram-me que eram eles que repetiam estes sons e que os transportavam entre montanhas. Chegámos ao nosso destino pouco antes do anoitecer e vi pela primeira vez a famosa Sung Lo Shan, a colina onde o chá verde terá sido descoberto. Choveu sem parar durante 3 dias e também esteve muito frio. A montanha Sung Lo, que com bom tempo eu conseguiria ver das janelas, estava agora envolvida na bruma e todas as árvores e arbustos vergavam sob o peso da chuva. Finalmente, ao 4º dia, as nuvens dissiparam-se, o sol voltou a brilhar e a natureza tornou-se alegre e sorridente.
It is exquisitely beautiful. It is so gorgeous. He gets to go tea picking in some of the greatest tea grounds anywhere. And it kind of makes the terrible time worth it.
Agora eu saía todos os dias, de manhã à noite, e entretinha-me a recolher sementes, a examinar a vegetação das colinas e a obter uma boa coleção de sementes de chá e de jovens plantas, a partir das quais é preparado o melhor chá verde comercializado. Reparei que os nativos muitas vezes nem chegavam a colher as folhas das plantas mais fracas, para que continuassem a crescer. Eles certificavam sempre que as plantas estavam fortes e vigorosas antes de começarem a colher as folhas.
The best part of the tea bush was the flush, the bud and the two top leaves. So in order to pick that, it did require a certain amount of skill. These tea-picking girls would pick 30,000 of those in a single day, which was maybe 4 or 5 pounds of these very light tea flushes.
Quando ela viu que eu tinha boas intenções, foi à plantação de chá e trouxe-me algumas plantas jovens, suplicando-me que as aceitasse. Fiquei muito feliz com a sua gratidão e aceitei as plantas com todo o gosto, o que aumentou consideravelmente a minha coleção.
One of the most important things that Fortune needed to bring to the East India Company was not just tea seeds. He needed the recipe for tea. It's not an obvious recipe. If you see a tea plant, you would not know how to get that into a teacup. It's not a pick and eat fruit. It's not an apple. It's a highly processed product.
Quando traziam as folhas das plantações, espalhavam-nas em tabuleiros lisos de bambu para secar qualquer umidade supérflua. Ficavam assim expostas durante muito pouco tempo. Entretanto, as frigideiras já estavam aquecidas graças à fogueira. Coloca-se uma porção de folhas em cada frigideira e agitam-se com ambas as mãos. São imediatamente afetadas pelo calor. Começam a estalar e ficam bastante úmidas e moles e, ao mesmo tempo, libertam um vapor considerável. Mantêm-se neste estado durante 4 ou 5 minutos. Depois são retiradas e colocadas num tabuleiro. O objetivo é retirar a seiva e a umidade e, ao mesmo tempo, torcer as folhas. Estas bolas de folhas são frequentemente agitadas e passadas de mão em mão. São novamente colocadas na frigideira, enlumbrando, e as folhas continuam a ser agilmente manuseadas pelos trabalhadores. Às vezes são lançadas para a mesa de ratã e enroladas uma segunda vez. Numa hora, as folhas já estão secas e com a sua cor definitiva. Têm uma cor verde baça, mas acabarão por se tornar mais claras.
Did Fortune think he was a spy? At the time, going undercover, going where he wasn't allowed by law, I believe he must have just considered it the perils of the job and the way he got things done, less than he was somehow committing this clandestine act.
Whatever he took, I would like to call steal. It was to stop China's monopoly over tea and stop Britain's dependence on China. So in that sense, it is theft. It's industrial and commercial espionage.
So Sanglo Mountains were the fulfillment of the first year of his travels. Fortune considered himself extremely successful. He had plants, he had seeds, he had everything he could possibly want. He really thought it was a home run. He was going to give the company everything they needed, that this was all he needed to do. He was going to ship it off to India, and the green tea part of his mission would be complete.
Desde que regressei a Xangai, que tenho estado ocupado a colocar as plantas de chá em caixas wardianas para as enviar para a Índia. As sementes de chá mantêm a sua vitalidade durante muito pouco tempo se estiverem fora da terra. No entanto, em 1849 consegui descobrir um método seguro e eficaz que se aplicaria a todas as sementes de vida curta e a todas as plantas do chá. Simplesmente colocar as sementes em caixas wardianas pouco depois de terem sido colhidas.
Nathaniel Ward invented really what's a miniature greenhouse, which allowed plants to be brought from abroad in a way that had never been possible before.
The Wardian case, which was developed in the early 1830s, was a bit like an aquarium but with a top on it. It was designed so that once the plant was put in it and was watered, the water would evaporate off the plant and would continue to hit the glass and then re-evaporate down. So it was really a self-watering system. The Wardian case meant that you could put your plants on the ship in the sunlight, if there weren't a storm. The plants would then get the sunlight, would survive the travel, but would be enclosed and would be safe from danger in this time period.
So he moved his seeds and plants to India on a ship, and that took about a month. And then when they got to Calcutta, someone opened the boxes. You're never supposed to open them. They only work when they're really a closed system. And then someone watered them. And this is a problem. And then, as the plants travel up into the Himalayas, the glass breaks. Of the many hundreds of plants he sent, he could probably count on a hand how many survived. And they were weak, and it was just a total failure. His first year was nothing but worthless. It gets very small shrift in his book. It's basically a paragraph. I can only imagine how horrible it must have felt. But for Fortune, he just gives it a little bit of, and that didn't work. Guess we'll have to do a little more. He keeps a stiff upper lip. He doesn't give away just how devastating it was.
Não fiquei satisfeito com o resultado da minha viagem. Não me agradava regressar à Europa sem a garantia de que tinha introduzido a planta do chá dos melhores distritos do chá preto da China nas plantações governamentais das províncias do noroeste da Índia.
At the time, the scientific community believed green and black tea were entirely different species. Confusingly enough, they didn't grow in the same place. Fortune needed to learn all of that.
Fiz os preparativos para outra viagem, talvez ainda mais importante, à zona do chá preto de Wishan. Apesar de um dos meus homens me ter trazido uma ótima coleção de folhas de chá e de sementes do famoso local de cultivo do chá preto, confesso que me sentiria mais satisfeito se eu próprio lá fosse.
He is going to the heart of the thing that England loves most, which is black tea. And he is struck dumb by how beautiful it is.
As famosas Wishan são várias colinas pequenas, sendo que nenhuma delas parece ter mais de 300 metros de altura. Tem um aspecto singular. Parece que foram projetadas no ar por um fenómeno da natureza e depois calcadas, partindo-se em centenas de colinas. Para os chineses, Wishan é um dos locais mais maravilhosos, mas também mais sagrados do Império.
It was really in Wishan where his breath was taken away the first time he beheld those beautiful karsts that rise out of the river and just the tea that's growing on the cliffs. He was completely taken aback at such perfect beauty.
Há uma loja que vende chá para que quem suba ou desça a montanha se possa refrescar. Parámos pelo caminho e refrescámo-nos com uma chávena de puro chá boêa, nas suas montanhas nativas.
There's a strain of tea there called the Da Hong Pao, the big red robe tea, that is even now considered sort of the most valuable tea, or some of the most valuable tea in China.
O chá acalmou a minha sede, reavivou-me o espírito e vieram-me à lembrança as palavras de um autor chinês que disse: o chá é extremamente útil, cultive-o e terá imensos benefícios, beba-o e o seu espírito ficará desperto.
So he was at a place where there was coolie labor moving goods up and down these routes in China at all times. There was a general sense, not just in Fortune, but in China, that coolies are not people as much as they are just pure labor. I mean, they're almost like oxen. You treat them as you would, no one thinks about how many cows it takes to move something up a mountain, or donkeys. And these people were very little more than human donkeys. They were the trucks that moved the goods.
Coolies is a translation of hard labor. It's been turned into a Western word. Coolies, they have no land, they have no possessions, and they sell their labor.
Viam-se longas filas de coolies a serpentear pelos vales, carregados com chá que seria vendido aos mercadores ingleses e americanos. Assim era a vida da China e dos chineses no dia-a-dia. Ao longe parecia uma colónia de formigas em andamento. Por mais numerosos que fossem os coolies, ou por muito boas que fossem as estradas, nunca os vi caminhar lado a lado, como é costume noutros países. Atravessar estas montanhas não é brincadeira nenhuma. Ao calcular as distâncias, não tive em conta as muitas colinas e montanhas que teríamos de atravessar, que não só nos travavam o progresso, mas tornavam o percurso mais longo do que parecia no mapa. Tinha calor, sede e estava exausto depois de ter subido a colina debaixo de um calor sufocante. E só rezava para chegarmos a um local com comida e alojamento. Pretendíamos montar acampamento num dos principais templos perto do cume. Os monges budistas escolhiam sempre os locais mais bonitos para construir os seus templos e monumentos.
He's welcomed into this tea district. This was not a place where he was threatened. It was probably a moment where he was perhaps safest in all of China.
Na verdade, os monges pareciam mais interessados no cultivo e produção de chá do que nos rituais da sua fé peculiar.
Rather like the Burgundian monks who let us know where all the great planting grounds are and wrote it down and kept great notes century after century so that we're still getting the best wine out of the same hillsides that we were getting wonderful wine out of 1,000 years ago. Tea had the same kind of provenance. The same hillsides produced the most wonderful terroir, and they produced the best tea, and the monks were the ones who preserved that knowledge. Tea is considered a kind of essential part of meditation. It is calming, it helps you focus. So it was very integrated into the monks' spiritual practice as well as their daily life. They would also sell it, and it would support their monasteries. There are many myths about how tea came to be that are Buddhist myths. The Buddha was trying to concentrate, and he was going to pray without ceasing, and he fell asleep, and he was so angry at himself that he ripped his eyelids out in frustration. And everywhere he threw his eyelid, a tea plant grew up. And so tea became this symbol of how we can stay alert and stay awake and concentrate on the divine.
The character for tea, cha, really only came around in the time of the Tang Dynasty, the 9th century. Tea, up until that time, did not have its own Chinese character. Many other characters had been used to represent tea. When it became so popular, well, at that point it was decided it needed its own character. The character cha would be written with a grass radical on top, followed by a ren, which means person, and then underneath, a tree. Grass, human, tree. Those three elements symbolize the harmony between man and nature.
Despeço-me agora da famosa Huishan, sem dúvida o conjunto de colinas mais maravilhoso que já contemplei. Daqui a alguns anos, quando a China começar a acolher estrangeiros e quando os naturalistas puderem percorrer estas colinas em segurança, sem receio de ser multados ou presos, terão uma experiência extremamente rica.
He was the perfect man for the job, not only in terms of science, but in terms of his spirit of adventure, his ability to get his work done, a lone Westerner in the interior of China.
Tudo tinha corrido melhor do que poderia esperar. Restava-me armazenar as minhas plantas e continuar a minha viagem até à Índia. No entanto, depois de ter estado em Huishan e nos seus arredores, e tendo todas estas plantas secas à minha frente, acredito que a planta de Huishan é bastante parecida com a Thea viridis, uma espécie inicialmente idêntica, mas que sofreu ligeiras alterações causadas pelo clima. As plantas de Huizhou e de Hui pertencem à mesma espécie. O Thea boea terá partido da mesma espécie. Após cuidadosa observação, consegui detectar muito poucas diferenças, mas não as suficientes para constituir uma variedade diferente e muito menos uma espécie. E em muitas destas plantas, as diferenças nem eram visíveis. Como tal, fui levado a crer que as características peculiares e as diferenças químicas entre o chá preto e o chá verde residem no aquecimento ou fermentação, acompanhadas pela oxidação causada pela exposição ao ar e não pela passagem por altas temperaturas durante o processo de secagem, como se acreditava. O vento de noroeste sopra em contínuo ao longo da costa da China. Com ventos favoráveis, em 4 dias atracámos na Baía de Hong Kong. Embarcámos no barco a vapor Lady Mary Wood e chegámos a Calcutá a 15 de março. Pouco depois da minha chegada, recebi o governador-tenente das províncias noroeste sob as ordens do governador-geral da Índia para visitar todas as plantações de chá e fazer um relatório sobre as suas condições e perspectivas futuras. Mr. Lauter, o comissário, tinha recebido instruções e parecia muito ansioso para que tudo fosse feito para garantir a rápida e segura chegada dos homens e das plantas ao seu destino. Continuei a viagem a 25 de março, num pequeno barco a vapor, até Allahabad. Na noite de 19, parti de Allahabad, numa carruagem governamental com destino a Saharanpur. Quando me virei para observar a paisagem peculiar e maravilhosa, as montanhas nevadas estendiam-se à minha frente em toda a sua grandeza, com o sol a brilhar sobre elas. Dizer que atravessam as nuvens não é exemplificativo da sua altura, uma vez que eu já me encontrava sobre as nuvens.
The whole idea of growing tea in India didn't start with Fortune. It was already had been going on for a while. That was one of the reasons Fortune was called in, to sort of carry the ball forward on to the next level.
Como resultado desta missão, cerca de 20 mil plantas do melhor chá preto e chá verde da China Central tinham sido introduzidas nos Himalaias. Seis produtores de primeira classe, 2 peritos e uma grande quantidade de plantas dos famosos distritos de Huichao também foram trazidos em segurança para as plantações governamentais nas colinas.
I mean, Robert Fortune is the father of modern tea plantations outside of China. Every cup of tea you drink pretty much owes a debt to Robert Fortune in some way. He is the man who started the global tea economy. And the way plants reproduce, it's possible even that some clones of Fortune's tea exist now in the Himalayas.
The theft of tea clearly had consequences both in China and overseas. I mean, paradoxically, in China, clearly it was the breaking of this monopoly that China had of the production of tea, and it sort of contributed to that decline which China was undergoing really from the beginning of the 19th century.
In the end, it led to the rise of Chinese nationalism and to the downfall of the Qing dynasty.
This theft had winners and losers. Other countries actually could become producers of tea, whether that's in South Asia and India and Sri Lanka, or indeed in Africa and other parts of the world.
There are hundreds and hundreds of different teas from all over the world. Over 50 countries produce tea now.
Hoje em dia, quando o chá se tornou quase uma necessidade em Inglaterra e nas suas colónias, a sua produção em grande escala e a baixo preço é de extrema importância. Mas para os próprios habitantes indianos, a produção deste bem é de grande importância. Os pobres paliária ou camponeses não têm os confortos básicos. O lucro permitir-lhes-ia comprar algumas das simples regalias da vida. E a educação dos nativos é uma das principais coisas a ter em conta.
Robert Fortune's life was a tremendous success for him because he was able to retire at about 50 after 20 years of travel with a terrific reputation, and one assumes quite a lot of money.
Nas minhas viagens para o interior, enquanto visitei muitos distritos quase desconhecidos dos europeus, atrevo-me a fazer um relato das minhas viagens e dos seus resultados ao público. Abençoado com uma boa constituição e saúde de ferro, não ligava a confortos e sentia-me bem com as dificuldades da vida de um viajante. Novos horizontes, novos países e novas plantas estavam à minha frente, o que representava a mais alta e pura das recompensas. Mesmo agora, num lado diferente do globo e já afastado destes horizontes e aventuras, olho frequentemente para trás, com sentimentos de prazer genuíno.